The only thing worse than having a woman who is into you suddenly go cold is when you're an older guy who's attracted to a hot, younger woman only to have her lose interest and start pulling away. Whenever there's a significant age difference between a man and a woman, certain dynamics and factors are at play. By not knowing or considering what these things are, there's a very good chance that you're going to disrupt the attractive equilibrium that naturally exists between older men and younger women. But there's also good news here. Once you understand what's going on and where things may have taken a wrong turn, you can avoid repeating your mistakes. Better yet, most of the time, you can even undo whatever damage you may have done once you realize what's going on. So if there's a particular girl or situation that's on your mind, whether it's something fairly recent or even if some time's gone by, pay close attention because I'm about to explain 4 of the most overlooked and insidious dating mistakes that older guys make. And better yet, I'm also going to explain how you can recover from them. Welcome back to the channel. As you probably know, I am Rob, and I landed on today's topic after going through the comments from my video on the 7 attractive older guy traits. The majority of the comments were really positive, and I always love reading comments like this and this and this and this, confirming everything that I've seen in my own personal life, as well as my work as a men's dating coach, which also happened to be everything I detailed in that video. But there were also a few comments, and I knew these comments were coming, comments like this and this and this and this. And I'm just gonna read one because if you've read one, you've kind of read them all. How to get a younger girlfriend explained in 3 seconds. Have lots of money. That attracts women. Now, you're probably expecting me to go off on a rant and vehemently denounce this misguided gentleman. But this guy and all the commenters who left these sorts of comments, they're actually right. Or at least they're right in a certain sense. But in this case, being right comes at an enormous cost. In fact, for them to be right, or what I'm going to explain is their version of right, they're committing the #1 mistake that an older guy, or really any guy for that matter, can make. I'm going to explain exactly what that means, but I can only do so after we've covered the first 3 mistakes on this list. That's because every mistake on this list builds on the last. And while each mistake in this succession is fixable, the 4th and final mistake is not. It's the one mistake that rules them all, which will all make sense by the time we get to the end of this video. But for now, let's get to the list. Mistake #1, centering the age gap. Now, at first glance, this mistake seems so obvious, you may be wondering why I even included it. Most guys are smart enough to know that it's a bad idea to say things like, I'm old enough to be your father, or begin a sentence with, back in my day. Even in jest, saying things like this indicates that you're uncomfortable with the age difference. But this is even true if you try to frame your age in a positive way, like, you're probably too young to remember. These sorts of statements aren't going to win you any favors with younger women. Think about it like this. Imagine a woman's dating a guy who's tall, which is an attractive quality. But if this tall guy is constantly mentioning his height, he's transformed an attribute that should make him appear more attractive into a liability. This mistake can be very nuanced. Even if you're not directly referencing the age gap, you may still be bringing it to the forefront through your reaction to things like pop culture. For example, if she mentions some rapper or some influencer that you've never heard of, don't let your age show in how you respond. Likewise, resist the urge to be the cultural historian. If she likes a song that samples music that maybe you grew up with, resist the urge to pontificate about it. Look, I get it. We all tend to get excited when we think we have an expertise in something because we lived through it. But impromptu lectures on pop culture are just going to make you look dated. The reason this matters is because if a woman feels she's getting the upper hand in the interaction, she's going to lose interest and move on to a guy who's more of a challenge. For younger women, this often takes the form of her trying to frame her youth as more desirable than your age and experience. Sometimes that takes the form of a test, but often it's a lot less obvious than that. A lot of times it's doing something as subtle as seeing how you react to some new song. And maybe it just sounds like noise to you, but if you react in a way that reminds her of her parents, or even worse, her grandparents, you're gonna turn her off. Always remember, older men are attractive, but elderly men are not. so you don't ever want to give off an elderly impression. Mistake number 2, having your authority usurped. This is a sneaky mistake that no one ever talks about, yet it can have a devastating effect on a younger woman's perception of you. If you find yourself in a situation where you're in a conflict or a dispute, especially with a younger guy, and he gets the upper hand, it's going to flip a lot of her most primal attraction triggers off. Without getting too deep into the evolutionary psychology, one of the major reasons a woman finds older men so attractive is because they represent the tribal leader archetype. This is why a lot of sexy older guy stereotypes also go hand in hand with leadership. Just think of the college professor who has authority over his classroom, or the older boss who commands respect and obedience. When that dynamic is upheld, she's hardwired to feel attraction. However, if that dynamic is contradicted, that's when problems set in. To relate a personal anecdote, I saw the ramifications of this mistake firsthand. This one night I was out and I met this cute college girl at a dive bar. This was just before I moved out of New York, so I was probably in my early 30s at the time and she was in her early 20s. So the age gap wasn't anything mind-blowing. Still, she told me a few times over the course of the night that she only dates older men. So after a few hours and a few rounds of drinks, we left the bar together. And once outside, I started to hail a cab, assuming that we'd probably go back to my place. But she said we could just go to her dorm room, which was conveniently right across the street. Now, even though I had a gut feeling this was the wrong move, I agreed and I followed her across the street. So her idea was that she was going to sneak me in as her guest, and we actually did get past the front desk, but right before we got to her dorm room, an RA swooped in and he asked to see my ID, and as you can probably imagine, things quickly went south after that. I mean, here I was, a guy in his 30s, arguing with this scrawny, pimple-faced 19-year-old who, according to the dorm rules, was the authority in the situation. And so, my night ended with me getting perp walked off campus. During the cab ride home, I thought about what happened, and I realized I made 2 mistakes. First, I put myself in a situation where I ceded my authority, and specifically I ceded my authority to a younger guy. While sometimes that's unavoidable, other times it is. In my case, I should have been more definitive about going back to my place. Instead, I did what seemed easier and more convenient, and I paid the price. Second, I picked a fight with an authority figure I had no chance of winning. Objectively, the RA had me dead to rights, since technically I was in the wrong. But rather than accept that and try to save face, I made things worse by being confrontational, which only sunk me deeper in my girl's eyes. Here's how you can avoid making this mistake altogether. First and foremost, you can just avoid putting yourself in situations where your authority can easily be usurped, and specifically be usurped by a younger guy. Places like nightclubs and rowdy bars are often staffed by hot-headed bouncers and bartenders who are basically just glorified bullies on a power trip. Avoid putting yourself in an environment where a young meathead has the final say in anything. Although sometimes, no matter how careful you are, conflict finds you. And in that case, resist the urge to argue or challenge authority. I know that may sound like a coward's play, but it's actually just being smart. Arguing with authority isn't going to change the situation, but it could change the way a younger woman sees you. Rather than coming off like a respected tribal leader, you make yourself out to be a groveling peasant. The optics are more important than your argument. Your reaction to a younger guy acting as an authority figure should be with either no emotion or, better yet, just react to him in a friendly, positive way, as if this is all just one big misunderstanding. Mistake number 3, not qualifying her enough. All right, so moving on to mistake number 3 on our list. This is a mistake I've seen several clients make, and particularly clients who aren't used to dating younger women. When a guy successfully attracts a woman who's a lot younger than the women that he usually dates, or she's a lot hotter than the women that he typically dates, he often adopts a new set of behaviors without even realizing it. If a woman is a standard deviation or 2 above what you're typically used to, it's easy to overlook the fundamentals. And often, qualification is one of the first things that goes out the window. Just so we're all clear, what I mean by qualification or qualifying a woman is verbally expressing what you're looking for in a woman. Essentially, it's having standards and openly articulating what those standards are. This is something that women do to men all the time. When a woman says, I don't date guys who, and you can fill in the blank, or I only date guys who, blank, very often a guy will then start trying to show her that he meets her expectations. So if a woman says, I love it when a guy knows how to fix things, a guy might suddenly run out to the nearest Home Depot and buy $600 worth of Ryobi power tools. And if that sounds oddly specific, it's because I had a client who did exactly that. This guy thought he was helping himself by trying to portray himself as Mr. Fix-It, but it actually had the exact opposite effect, which was why he came to me. In any interaction, there's usually one person setting the standard and the other person trying to measure up to that standard. And now that probably sounds pretty familiar to anyone who watched my other video. But it's crucial that you're the one who's setting the standard and not vice versa. And the way you set the standard is through qualification. Funny enough, this probably comes natural to you when you're dealing with women that are just so-so, the okay girls. When you're just lukewarm on a woman, you're not as afraid to lose her, so you say things that are a little bit more polarizing. So if she's a smoker and you don't like secondhand smoke, you probably don't think twice about letting her know that smoking is a turnoff for you. But all that tends to fly out the window once a woman is younger and/or hotter than what you're used to. Suddenly, you're walking on eggshells because you don't want to lose her. Whenever you catch yourself overanalyzing what you say to a woman or second-guessing what you're texting her, you're no longer qualifying her. Just the opposite, you're trying to qualify yourself to her. But I want to be crystal clear about something. Catching feelings for a woman is not a mistake. Likewise, it's not wrong to feel like you're walking on eggshells. There's nothing wrong with feeling that. It's not even a mistake to overanalyze a little bit or second guess yourself, because that's just a natural response when you meet a high quality woman that you're interested in, which is the whole point of this channel. So I'm not telling you to fight against your feelings, but what I am saying is that you should fight the urge to let those feelings dictate your behavior. How we feel is really beyond our control, but how we act is always our choice. When we're in the throes of emotion, we need to choose our behavior wisely. Better yet, we need to choose our behavior attractively. And one way you can make sure to do that is by actively inserting qualifying questions and phrases into your interactions with women, regardless how hot they are, regardless how much younger they are than you. Even if she's very attractive. Actually, especially if she's very attractive. Listing and explaining the best ways to qualify a woman is a bit beyond the scope of this video, but don't worry, I'm scheduled to record another video on this topic. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure to do that now so you don't miss it. All right, well, with that shameless plug out of the way, let's move on to the fourth, final, and most fatal mistake an older guy can make in his dating life. Mistake number 4, adopting limiting beliefs. So here we are at mistake number 4. And the reason I saved the worst for last is because this mistake is the common denominator of all the previous mistakes, as well as really any mistake that you're gonna make with a woman. That's because what you believe about the world becomes your reality. There's a Henry Ford quote that perfectly sums this up. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Simple as that quote may seem, it actually describes a unique feature of human cognition called reticular activating system, or RAS. And I'd encourage you to do a deep dive into the neuroscience behind this because it's actually really fascinating stuff. But for our purposes, think of the RAS as a filter between your conscious mind and the outside world. It takes instructions from your conscious mind and passes them to your subconscious. Essentially, it's tuned to prioritize information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs and desires, while often ignoring contradictory information. This inadvertently feeds into our confirmation bias. So when guys leave comments like this, "Money, what else?" they're programming themselves with "women only go for rich guys." That's what they're telling their subconscious. Their RAS then highlights anything that supports this belief. Any correlation to them becomes causation, which only further gets them doubling down on their belief, which then directs their RAS to look for more of the same evidence. It's a self-destructive cycle and literally the definition of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In fact, with that in mind, I'd actually like to amend the Henry Ford quote to, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're going to prove yourself right." So unless these guys in the comment section are jet-setting millionaires, and judging by their cynical and butthurt tone, I don't think that's the case, they are going to prove themselves right by going out and getting rejected by women and staying single. This is why adopting a self-limiting belief is the king of all unattractive mistakes. You might as well just go ahead and castrate yourself, because you don't have a chance with women. You're not even in the game. You are literally programming your brain to reinforce to you why you deserve to be single and celibate and why you suck. Even worse, if you do ever manage to get yourself in front of a halfway decent woman, your subconscious mind is going to sabotage it. As a coach, and even just as a human being, I cannot wrap my head around why anyone would sideline themselves with limiting beliefs. Yet, just look at the comment section and you'll see dudes shooting themselves in the dick with their negative beliefs. And unfortunately, these guys are beyond help. There's nothing I or really anyone can teach them if they believe the only way to get better with women is by flashing money. But for the rest of us, I'm going to end with another quote from Henry Ford. "Anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young." It's always nice to wrap up a list on older guy dating mistakes with a reminder that learning to be more attractive to women keeps you young. Chasing tail truly is the fountain of youth. And until next time, thanks for watching and supporting the channel.